Welcome to Joy in the Breakthrough, a podcast where we'll be talking to a wide range of leaders from different generations and backgrounds who have found power in being broken open. I'm Connie Lindsay.
And I'm Anna Valencia. We are your hosts, and we believe that our challenges can lead to breakthroughs, and we want to share those insights with you.
We hope these stories will inspire you to explore the I'm possible in you.
We are so excited to have you here today to meet our amazing Anna DeShawn, our extraordinary producer of Joy in the Breakthrough. And Anna, who uses all pronouns, anything respectful. I'm going to read her bio, and she said not to, but I'm going to do it anyway because it is just too good not to read. She is an Ambie award-winning podcast producer and host. And for those that don't know what that means, it means basically she is an Oscar winner or Grammy winner of podcasts. She is a Chicago-born social entrepreneur who builds streaming platforms which center and celebrate BIPOC and QTPOC. Media has always been her passion, and in 2009, she quit corporate America, everyone, and became an entrepreneur and founded E3 Radio, an online radio station playing queer music and reporting on queer news with an intersectional lens. Most recently, she co-founded The Cube, check out her gear, a podcast production company and curated platform to discover the best music and podcasts by BIPOC and QTPOC creatives. Anna is determined to ride media into its next era by utilizing digital media streams to tell the stories and play the music that deserves to be heard. And I just want to say thank you for saying yes when you met with Connie and I through just a Zoom. It was just an intro Zoom. And we left saying, okay, send over your contract. Let's work together. And you have helped hold our hand, create these beautiful scripts, focus us to bring this to life. So thank you. And we're so excited to have you on the pod today.
I'm excited to be on the pod. It's been an honor producing this podcast with y'all. I mean, you are two powerhouse women of color who have made your spaces and places that oftentimes people don't get to see. And you all are making inroads that people don't get to see, right? The work you all are doing is not the work that always ends up on the front page, but it's the work that's so incredibly necessary. So I get a lot out of producing this show with y'all.
Well, I want to add my welcome because you are all that. And I personally want to thank you for some of the insanity that you see with us, that you just navigate through so brilliantly with your gifts and talents. But today is about you. Our conversation is about the Anna DeShawn. So my first question is, tell us about you, Anna. What makes you who you are?
My family makes me who I am. I'm definitely an extension of all the good things that they are, right? And to have a family that embraces me for all of who I am is not a common story. And it's not common for people in my community. You know, we're in Pride Month, and I'm very much so sitting in the fact that queer folks today, our identities in politics are, it's not always a safe place depending on where you're at. And that resonates with me a lot in this moment. And so I am the child of two amazing people and a sister who's 17 years older than me who raised me, and family that's country and family that's city. And they taught me that I really could do anything I wanted to do, that I really could be whatever I wanted to be if I just believed that I could in the face of it all. And I'm really grateful for that.
Excellent. And you reflect that back into the world by all the many ways that you give and serve.
Well, this show is really about those breakthrough moments that bring you to joy. And I would love to hear about a few of the breakthrough moments that you've had in this journey that has gotten you here.
And the first one I'll start with is when I decided that radio was the thing that I really loved. And it was a moment in undergrad. I was studying radio television production at Drake University. Big ups to DU, Bulldogs. But I realized in my pursuits to be the next Robin Roberts on ESPN doing play-by-play announcing that people on television didn't look like me. That masculine ascendant women who want to wear a tie or a suit are not the people who get to sit behind the desk and do the news. And I enjoyed it, but I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make a career out of this. I don't know if I want that fight. We really do have to sometimes choose which fights we want to pursue. Ended up with an internship at a radio station, turned on Tom Joyner in the morning, And I grew up with Tom Joyner, and now it was like, oh, this is lit. I can sit here in sweatpants and talk to thousands of people, and people would call and say they enjoyed my voice and they liked having me on. I was like, maybe this is what I should be doing. And I pivoted. I started having a radio show at undergrad. When I went and got my master's, I had a radio show, and I just couldn't let it go. I also understood the power of media. So that was one moment. The next moment was when I decided to quit corporate. Mm-hmm. And it was a COVID moment. I had reached excellence in corporate. I really had. I had done everything I needed to do, and I experienced all of the pains that women of color in corporate experience, being promoted over, not being looked at as a leader just because I'm not trying to, be in the boss's face every moment of the day. And I quickly realized, well, this is not serving me. I'm making everybody a lot of money, and everybody's very happy with my work, but I'm not completely fulfilled. And COVID really did me in. My wife got COVID. I got COVID. It was there at the very beginning. Had to leave her at the hospital. She had to be she was in a bubble. It was really scary. They had given her some experimental treatments because that's how early it was when she got it. And I'm like, what am I living for? What am I doing with my time? How am I spending my time? And someone told me at one point, can you imagine what the worst case scenario is if you go out here and take this big leap of faith? What's the worst thing that can happen? And what I came up with was moving back in with my parents and staying upstairs in the room that I grew up in with my wife and my dog. And after I thought about that, I said, well, that's not too bad. Right? It's not too bad.
Some free meals.
Yeah. I love what you said about asking that question. Because so often we can create in our minds, I have a girlfriend who used to say, we awfulize the thing. What is the worst that could happen? And we want our listeners to take that in. What is the worst that could happen? And one of your ways that you navigated that was you looked through it and said, yeah, this is something that I can do and want to do. And so tell us about as you made that decision, that big pivot, leaving corporate and starting your own thing. What was the next step for you in terms of, I'm a corporate person, so I would think of it in terms of strategy. Did you have a strategy for moving through?
I did. So I saved my money, right? We're not just going out here quitting jobs, people.
Say it again.
Okay,
Say it again.
Don't do that. Prepare for the moment. And so I had savings. I took time to rest a little because I was working in online streaming and virtual events. And so I was up for North America, EMEA, APAC. I was working 14, 16 hours a day during COVID. And I needed a break. So I definitely took a little break. But then I was clear I wanted to start my own morning show on the radio. And I did that. It was called Wake Up with Anna and Friends. It was a good time. And I knew I needed to fundraise because we wanted to build a mobile application for the Cube. And so I know we needed to do that. And so my energies went to pouring into my first crowdfunding campaign. We raised $70,000 for the app and for our work. And so those were the first things that I did. I just knew I wanted to settle into the work and also learn how to work. Not working how I was working in corporate, checking off lists or staying in meetings all day or staying busy. Like those were deemed for success in our space. And I'm like, I don't have to work like that anymore. Yeah. And so I had to really unlearn a lot of stuff after I quit corporate. And that was my focus.
And busy does not always mean productive.
For sure.
And I think that's something we're sold in corporate and even in government. But really, COVID taught me it's where you put your time and your energy at your best when you're able to be the most productive. Actually, when people weren't coming to my office and bothering me with their problems and being able to have time to just think and be creative and work. And one of the things I want to say that Connie talked about, the worst thing, and you mentioned the worst thing that could happen. Sometimes we don't think about what the best thing could happen. And I want to hear how that felt when you started hitting that groove and the best thing that you couldn't even imagine for yourself started kind of coming into fruition.
I'm Deanna Palomar, guest hosting this week's In the Arena with my very special guest, Jimena Beltran Cuanquiu. Take a look.
I was born in Mexico City. I was Mexican and Chinese. There weren't people like me. I didn't fit in anywhere. And so I didn't want to fit in. I actually thought it was really great being weird and different and strange.
Tuesday at 7 on CanTV 19, streaming on cantv.org, and the new CanTV Plus app.
It's amazing because the reason I wanted to build the Cube and expand on the radio business into podcasting is because it is so incredibly hard to find good podcasts by Black and brown folks in the space. It is just incredibly difficult. We wanted to solve this problem. And in my mind, the best thing that can happen is that we be the #1 podcast listening app for people of color. Like, that is the best thing that can happen. But
And win an Ambi.
Yo, the Ambi isn't something I thought about. Yeah. It's so interesting. Now, there are awards I think about. Let's be clear. There are goals.
Because you manifest it.
I do. I mean, a Pulitzer Prize would be amazing. A Peabody, creating journalistic work.
And meeting Robin Roberts.
Well, Robin Roberts is absolutely like...
If you're listening to our podcast, Robin Roberts, Anna DeShawn.
If anyone has a connect, reach out to us.
I will
send
be
us a DM.
Forever indebted. Yeah. But those moments, I just couldn't even have imagined what that moment was. And the category I won for in the Ambies was called the DIY category, which is an awful name. And it was the first time they had this award. But essentially, it was if you create a podcast for less than $3,000 an episode.
And DIY stands for
do it yourself. Right.
Yeah.
But imagine $3,000 an episode, right? That is a lot of money. Mm-hmm. That is not what we come close to. And we made 150 episodes in our first season. So you imagine if I spent $3,000 times 150 episodes, the threshold that we're talking about in the podcasting space. I appreciate that they're making room for us, independent creators, right, too, because there's so many of us that people cannot find. But we have to really think about the perspective that we're taking when we talk about $3,000 an episode.
And not everyone can afford that, especially if you're coming from Black and brown communities. A lot of us, our first-time college grads.
Yes.
We're building community wealth for our own family. A lot of times we're taking care of our other family members with resources. And so $3,000 episode, I know, I'll tell you, our listeners, Connie and I are not spending that kind of money.
Not at all. Please don't get it twisted.
But that's like a barrier for so many people to enter.
It's a huge barrier, and it's not a determinant for success.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Correct. And so my hope is that win also helps to tell that story. But the journey has been amazing, and it's a roller coaster ride.
Tell us about the top of the roller coaster, a roller coaster moment at the top, and then another moment where you thought, or was there ever a moment where you thought, yeah, maybe I need to rethink this?
I'm sitting in that moment right now, and I can be transparent with y'all in that moment. This is one of those low moments right now. When the work is paying off, there are good things happening. Really magical things are happening for the work. But that doesn't always translate into monetary in my account, and I can pay all my bills and pay everybody who's on my team. And that's something I really value about being a business owner, is that I can create this microeconomy that Rachel Rogers talks about in her book and support other people's dreams. We just won 2 communicator awards for our Cube Original Black HIV in the South. How do we get here? And it was the first awards for my editor and my producer that they have ever won in the podcasting space. And they've been creating podcasts for a really long time. I'm excited. I'm more excited for them that they won. Yeah. You're right. And they told me that. That makes me happy. That brings me a lot of joy. So probably the peak moment was when we actually licensed and distributed Black HIV in the South to Urban One Podcast Network, considering it was our first project out the gate, and to distribute it to the largest media company serving Black folks in this country is a pretty big deal. And so that was like the peak.
Love it. This is Pride Month, as you said, and I want to talk about identity. We've had conversations about identity. Talk to us, Anna, about your identity, owning fully who you are. And we know that all of us, people have opinions about who we are and how we show up. But what message do you want our listeners to hear about identity, who you are, how you own that? My grandmother used to say, cover all the ground you stand on. Tell us how you do that.
It was not easy because growing up in spaces, in Black spaces, they want you to be Black. Like, this is Black. We ain't talking about queer stuff. We ain't talking about women. We talking about Black issues. And then I'd be in LGBTQ spaces, and I'd be the only Black person in that space. And they were like, we ain't talking about your Blackness here. We're talking about LGBTQ issues. We're talking about marriage equality. And I'm like, but for Black people, marriage equality is not the first thing. Yes. Marriage is a privilege. Marriage is a contract. We have Black folks who are queer who don't know where they're going to sleep tonight. Marriage was not the number one issue. And if you remember, it didn't pass the first time here in Illinois because of that. There was no engagement with Black and brown communities around that issue. So it took a minute. Even with E3 Radio in the beginning, it was not a queer radio station. The logo was purple and white. It had no rainbow in it at all. I didn't want it to be queer because once it is queer, that's all people can see. And at some point, I had to let all that go because I just realized that's what I cared about, though.
Yes.
I cared about people that looked like me. I cared about people who were going through things that I've been through. And those are the stories that I wanted to tell.
I love it.
And those are the stories I tell today at the intersections, race and sexuality, because even today it's so important that we understand and see the humanity in people.
Yes.
I think it's very easy for right now, in politics in particular, to demonize people on the margins because people don't know them. There's so many people who don't know a trans person. And so when you don't know a trans person, you can just take whatever anybody has to say about them and you'll run with it. But the moment you know a trans person and you hear their story about identity, there is no way that you would deem them unfit to have the same rights, right?
True.
That you have. You just wouldn't do that to a human. So
We call that intersectionality in the work we do in DE&I. And you're right, I'd often have people ask me, so Connie, do you identify more as a black person or as a woman? As if we could separate the two. And I love what you said about, I don't want to have to choose. You want to show up as who you are. And pushing for that and for all of those who, because once we otherize each other, it's easier for me to make you my enemy. But if I see you as a person worthy of love and respect and dignity and all of the things that humans ought to have, that's where the magic happens. So I thank you for the courage, conviction, and commitment that you bring to all that you do.
thank you.
And thank you for sharing your story and trusting Connie and I to help tell your story, because often you're behind the camera, you're behind the scripts, but we wanted to showcase your talents and your gifts. And so thank you for sharing and trusting us to allow you the platform to tell your story, because I know it's going to touch someone.
For sure.
It's wild. Y'all are amazing. So the fact that y'all even asked me, I mean, you all could ask absolutely anybody to be on this podcast, and they'd be like, yes, please. So I'm grateful y'all even asked.
Yes, because you're a superstar, and you're stuck with us now. Well, it's time for one of our favorite segments, tips and techniques. And I know you got a lot of gems from Anna's story, but I'd love to start with Anna first. If you could tell we talked about the power of mentoring last episode, and then also talking kind of about identity and your journey. What tips and techniques could you give our listeners today?
I'd say for anyone who's maybe looking to be an entrepreneur or go out here and go get it, I would say focus on one thing. Like, that's the tip I would give you. After I left corporate, to your point about being busy is not being productive, I still had my hand in 10 different things. And so many of us today are hyphenated, like we're like hyphenated this, you're this and this and that. That's great. I mean, as creatives, we're always got another idea. But at some point, you got to focus on one thing. Like, give everything you got to one thing and see how far you can take it if you gave all your energy there, instead of sparsing it out between 5 or 6 different ideas. So for me, the tip is focus.
I love
Focus
that.
and move with intention.
Mine today is don't be put in a box. Often in politics, I always was put into one category. And I had to really struggle with this because, I'm Mexican and I'm white. I'm a mom and I'm a woman. And they always wanted to be, if you didn't speak Spanish well enough, you were not Latina enough. Or were you not white enough in each space? And how did you show up in each space? And I finally said, no, I don't want to be put in a box. I'm just Anna. And I'm multifaceted. And that's how I'm going to flow. So don't allow people to put you in that box. Connie?
I have 3 things I want to leave
Of course you
us
do.
with. Of course I do, because you all know I live in alliteration world. But it's courage, conviction, and commitment. And just listening to your story, Anna, the courage to take time to stop and focus, as you said, on this is how I want my life to look. I believe I'm a co-creator with God in my life. The courage to do that, and the way that you stand up, because you sitting here today is empowering somebody
Yes.
to show up with their true identity. The conviction, because we know people push back. I'm sure they do. But you are convicted and convinced that this is who you are, and look at what it's bringing for you, and commitment. There's a story that people say, if you eat bacon and eggs for breakfast, you know that the chicken was involved, but the pig was committed. So you are committed, and I honor you for that. And it's just a privilege to have had this conversation and to continue working with you.
Well, we're going to end here with our Say Less segment with Connie. When we were developing this pod, Connie was throwing out all these words. And I was like, can you say that again? How do you spell that? And you have just been giving us so many great things, great words of saying more by saying less. So I cannot wait to hear what you have for us today in this episode.
Delighted. I was so motivated by the conversation with both Annas because they energize me, and you all just help leave me in a place of joy every time we talk. We schedule a meeting for 30 minutes and
It goes over.
It goes over, and that's okay. But my word today is liminal. And liminal, I define it as the place between no longer and not yet. And listening to Anna D's story, you use joy as an act of resistance. Your persona, the way you show up in the world, so liminal. The space between no longer and not yet. When you made the decision to no longer work in corporate to move forward, you didn't know yet what would happen, and look where you are. So while we're in that liminal space, let's create some joy. Let's break through. Let's pivot. Do all the things we need to do, and you see success before you. And we are so grateful that you're with us.
So Anna D, before we end today, I want you to tell us, how can we follow you? What's your links and your pages, like the kids say? What's your handle?
I love it, the kids.
The kids.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can follow me at the Cube app, TheQube app, and at Anna DeShawn. All social. TikTok is really where I'm at.
We want to make sure we uplift your work. Well, thank you so much for joining us again for a wonderful episode of Joy in the Breakthrough. We had a great conversation with Anna D today. Check us out on all of our handles, and we look forward to seeing you soon at Joy in the Breakthrough.